I am deeply honored to be able to present to you our first panel to kick off this wonderful program. And we're really going to be talking about why IP is important and how that can contribute to your entrepreneurship journey. And so this year, we have three fantastic speakers who will be speaking to you and talking to you about their own business successes, as well as how they've leveraged IP and intellectual property so that it is a gold mine within their business. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and kick it off. And let me introduce you to our first panelist, Miss Tiffany. Tiffany, you were named Cornell Entrepreneur of the Year in 2022. Congratulations. Your resume is incredibly extensive and impressive. Our audience has read your bio already, but we like to hear from you. So could you please tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to be here as the Entrepreneur of the Year?
Yes, thank you so much, Hope, for having me here today. Thank you to the USPTO, to Eric and Lewis, my fellow panelists, and to everyone watching out there around the country, potentially around the world. It's one of the exciting bits about this post-pandemic experience that we get a chance to join in on things that normally we wouldn't have access to. So I'm Tiffany Norwood. I'm an inventor, an innovator, a creative, a technologist, and an entrepreneur. As Hope mentioned in my intro, I'm the current 2022 Entrepreneur of the Year for Cornell University. One thing she didn't mention, though, that I am the first Black woman to get that Lifetime Achievement Award in its 40 years. So I'm really proud of that, especially because it's an award of being self-made. I've had 8 startups over the course of my career as an entrepreneur. I filed for my first patent at the age of 19 with some friends. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk about the importance of IP rights, and the value of your imagination. Thank you, Hope.
Thank you, Tiffany. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Lewis, who also has a very robust resume. But one of the many hats that you currently wear is as publisher of Inventor's Digest, a 35-year-old publication dedicated to promoting American innovation. Actually, Tiffany was featured in the February issue of this year. So can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you down this path of innovation and inventorship?
Thanks, Hope. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's always wonderful to be a part of Invention Con. I've participated over a number of years in this event, both in person and virtually. But my background, I'm a serial entrepreneur and inventor. I'm an inventor on 10 U.S. patents, and my company, Inventus, has been involved in the development, monetization, filing of hundreds of additional patents. I have a real passion both for innovation as well as intellectual property. And so besides having Inventus and Inventor's Digest, I also teach entrepreneurship and innovation at Johnson & Wales University, at Wake Forest University, and at Central Michigan University. And so, American innovation is so important today. Using the patent system to leverage that intellectual property is obviously crucial in that journey as an entrepreneur. And so just a pleasure to be with everyone here today.
Thanks, Lewis. And now I'm going to turn it over to Eric Ingram. And Eric, welcome and thank you for being here today. So you were given the Startup of the Year award last year for your company, Scout. So congratulations to you as well. You also have had numerous accomplishments, and we will try to get to most of them during this panel. But for now, can you tell us about your company, Scout, and how you brought it to be named Startup of the Year?
Yes, and like everyone said, appreciate you having me here. Excited to be a part of this panel and a part of Invention Con. So Scout is a company that is developing space technology to make satellites more aware of their surroundings. and to develop vision systems to provide essentially the traffic cameras of space. And we've been really innovative in what we've done as a company to develop our products and services and get things out there. And we've tried to be as base level as possible with how we communicate our message to everyone. And so being named Startup of the Year was a great experience. Competition ran by an organization called Established Startups Involved. And it was really about communicating the message of what you're trying to achieve as your organization and the value you're bringing to society or whatever industry you're involved with. So being a space tech company that we were and being able to clearly communicate it and the innovation we're working on was certainly useful. And I have a background in everything from engineering at an asteroid mining company to regulating at the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation. So a wide breadth of experiences that led to me founding Scout.
All right. Thank you, Eric. So I'm going to move a little bit into your intellectual property journeys and your invention journeys. And I know that Lewis and Tiffany, both of you have mentioned that you are serial inventors and have titled yourself that. So for Lewis, especially for the company that you are currently with, Inventus, right now, you've met a number of different inventors and entrepreneurs. And so based on your experience with your clients, can you think of an experience in which the value of intellectual property became evident and led a company or inventor to a more successful outcome than if they did not seek protection?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hope. And, we experience this quite frequently with the clients that come to us. Inventors come to us with a great idea. They want to turn that great idea into a successful business. And they learn very quickly, especially when they start speaking with investors, that there needs to be some underlying asset to their business. They don't have any revenue yet. They don't really have any assets in terms of inventory or manufacturing equipment. But that patent becomes an asset that gives the company value. Because even if the business model doesn't work, the underlying intellectual property could have value to someone else that may want to license the intellectual property, or if they were to sell that intellectual property to another company. And so the IP becomes really critical in a startup to make sure that not only do you create those barriers of entry, the ability to prevent others from making, using, or selling what you've created, but it creates a tangible asset that can be leveraged to raise capital or to help the company grow.
All right, thanks, Lewis. And I'm going to turn to you, Tiffany, and ask you a question with respect to why did you find intellectual property and patents in particular, since you are a serial inventor, why was it really important for you in your business and in your IP journey?
Yeah, thank you, Hope. There's two aspects of why intellectual property and intellectual property rights are so important. There's the inward-facing aspect as well as the outward-facing aspect, which Lewis had touched upon. And I would like to talk to both a bit from the perspective of an inventor, an innovator, and creator. So when people think of intellectual property and IP, for the majority of the population, it's quite inaccessible. They think, oh, that's what those PhDs do, and it doesn't really relate to me. It's more about pharmaceuticals, etc. But in reality, at its core, innovation and invention is about imagination, which I talked a bit about in the my intro, saying the value of imagination. And so, as an entrepreneur and an inventor entrepreneur, so much of our business and the money that we make and the wealth that we build is oriented towards our imagination and some idea of doing something a new way, a better way, a different way. So one of the first reasons to look at IP and IP rights and patents is, and it's a tangible act of showing that you take your idea and invention and imagination seriously. And that's so important as a first step, because then you basically spend the first few years of a startup trying to convince others of the same, right? That it is important, that it is valuable to the market, et cetera. And you start to add to that story in tangible ways by building the product, by actually having customers, by having impact studies and use cases. But in the beginning, all you have is the idea and the story of the idea and your behavior around how seriously you take it. So one of the ways to show that you're serious about this, that you're going to, reap the benefits and the value of it is to file for patents, file for trademarks, et cetera. Then the other reason goes to what Lewis was talking about, and it's the other side of the same coin, which is in the beginning, you have the imagination, you have the idea, you have the vision of the product, and you might have sketches and stories, which is basically what goes into the patent application. And then you start building out prototypes, et cetera. But in the meantime, you need usually money and people. And the way that you attract the money and people is by having color to each of the elements of your story. We create this amazing thing. We basically invented fire, and it's going to, provide this much value. And one of the ways that you can tangibly show that from an external perspective is to be patent pending or to have the patent already issued. And so it gives color and real anchor to the story that you're pitching to raise money or to get people to work for your company.
All right, thanks, Tiffany. And so, Eric, can you tell us a little bit more? I know that you've applied for a patent or a couple of patents for your business. At what point did you decide that, hey, this is what we need to do to be able to advance our innovation and move forward to the next step? And why was it so important for you to do that?
Yeah, and we did file our first patent last year, so still getting experience at the process, but we have a lot more we're planning to submit. So as a startup, per what the other panelists were saying, you're really trying to do two things. Make your technology, your innovation defensible, and also create value. And what we were doing at my company, we were building prototypes, we were developing that technology, and we're in a very competitive field. We're in a very competitive segment of a very rapidly growing industry. And so having that technology advancement, which allows us to have a bit of that edge, means we need to be able to protect it. And also when going to investors, when they're saying, why should we invest in you instead of your competitor or someone doing something similar? You can say, well, for one, we have this technology, and two, we can protect it. And those who are our competitors at least shouldn't be doing the same exact thing. And so it's kind of a multifaceted thing that drove us to want to apply for that first patent. I know there's a lot of decisions that go into it as a small company, but laying out in terms of priority what you're developing and what can provide the most value immediately, both in defensibility as well as in the value creation of what your company is developing.
So all of you have spoken to the value creation of intellectual property and using that value creation to be able to attract investors, and getting capital for your business. And so I'm actually going to throw it over to Lewis a little bit and ask him, how do you use intellectual property and how do you create that value so that it does become attractive to investors at the end of the day?
Yeah, being an entrepreneur is about managing uncertainty and managing risk. And one of the variables that goes into that is your intellectual property. And so when you're able to file for a patent, when you're able to file for a trademark on your brand or on the logo of your company, that starts to provide some certainty around the business. You've got some asset there that you can leverage moving forward. And it helps reduce some of the risk associated with being an entrepreneur and being a startup. So it's a good investment from the very beginning to make sure that you've properly protected your your idea, that you've protected your brand that you plan to go to market with. When you're starting a business, the first thing you want to do is make sure that your idea is even feasible, right? You want to do some market research. You want to make sure that there's truly demand for your product or service. You want to go out there and kind of test, take the pulse of consumers. And having a provisional patent application gives you that ability to go out there and start to, get that market feedback without fear that you may destroy the novelty of the invention. So I'm a very big proponent of, once you feel like there's an opportunity to file a provisional application or file for your utility application, so you've got that patent protection, and then hear from consumers whether there's truly demand for the product. What you want to do is you want to make sure there's a big enough opportunity to justify the risk that you're going to take financially to build that business.
And then, Tiffany, when you're looking at your business strategy and considering the risks and the investment that you need to make into intellectual property, how do you balance your intellectual property strategy with your business strategy?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, especially when you're in startup mode and every single little dime counts. For me, what I look at is strategically, where do I want to be in 1, 3, 5, 10 years, and what I'll need in order to create that value that I'm looking to create and defend it. I think Eric had mentioned about, I can't remember if it was Eric or Lewis, excuse me, about the defensibility. I've had a lot of experience with how, on the other side, when you have a patent and you have a business, trying to defend it. But on the front end, I look at the various things that, the strategy and where I want to end up, then the tactics, that I want to take. And typically, one of the strategic elements is starting to put in place the IP portfolio. And so it's tricky in the beginning when you have so little resources. Typically, the founders are not paying themselves, looking at this and saying, but how do I do it practically? I have no money, et cetera. How do I start this process or have it be part of my strategy? And the way I've handled it is still having it as part of the business strategy, but how I execute it depends on what sort of resources I have. So, for example, if I have a tremendous amount of resources, because I raised, at one point when we were doing satellite radio startup, I'd raised $670 million. Okay, well, then we have the resources to have some of the top intellectual property attorneys on this and really looking at our IP portfolio. But also, I've started a company where we raised a few $100,000 first from the three of us co-founders. And in that case, we did drafted the claims ourselves with a lot of the stuff and did the initial diagrams and then used some of the new online resources that had popped up. This was about 15 years ago. To help us with submitting the patent and also doing a few other things, other tools that you have on the software side, which includes copyright in addition to the patent. So that's the way I more look at it. I look at the strategy and then I'll have different flavors for the tactics depending on what resources and budget I have access to. But I won't let resources or budget get in the way of the strategy that I want to execute. I will also add that these days, because the first time I filed for a patent was in the late 80s, right? These days, the resources that the USPTO has for innovators and inventors, especially small ones like me, right? Where you might be filing as a single innovator, as an individual, or as a small startup. The resources that are on the USPTO website, phenomenal. The resources that they have as far as recruiting people to try to file themselves, phenomenal. I have a number of fellow founders that have filed for their own trademarks.
All right, thanks, Tiffany, and thanks for the plug on the resources that the USPTO provides. And so for the audience, if you do have questions on our resources, all of them are on our website, and please feel free to go to uspto.gov and search through many of our resources that we have for startups and entrepreneurs. And so, Eric, I'm going to throw it over to you, and listening to both Louis as well as Tiffany on value proposition and IP strategy, the question always is budget, right? And how much should you allocate to intellectual property? And at what point do you think that you should be spending money on intellectual property, especially on your patents? Do you have any perspective on that and any thoughts on that particular topic?
Yeah, and for what someone else was saying, sorry, it's all about making sure you have a plan going into it, and then knowing when you want to execute on it. So, we pursued our first patent because it's fairly top level and it covers a lot of our core product that we would be taking to market, and the stuff that we would have to show companies that have the intellect to do something with that. And so filing a provisional allows you to do that at a lower cost, allows you to protect it, test the market, and then hopefully gather enough investment or customer income or whatever to be able to expand that to a full patent. And that's certainly the way you can go about it. And then from there, for instance, we have a plan for about another dozen patents we want to file, and the order in which we want to do them and kind of stages we want to do that at. And that's dependent upon our financial situation, about where we're at in the market and what needs to be shared with potential customers or the market in general. In terms of budgetary things, it's going to vary a little bit per company and per situation. Unfortunately, I have not raised $600 million yet, still working to it. So if anyone out there is willing to contribute, reach out. But it's about knowing where you are as a company, what you're comfortable with, and per how we budget it. We don't necessarily put IP in its own category, but we kind of lump it in with our legal expenses and that sort of stuff. And we've recently gotten to a point where we're able to plan for that. We've gotten past that chaotic startup stage where you don't really have structure for anything. We're putting structure in place, which is a great place to be. And, so in the legal category, which is kind of where we lump our IP work, we're, putting about 6% of our budget towards those efforts. So in terms of like a general target of where one startup's budget is for that sort of thing, that's the data point I can give you.
And Louis and Tiffany, I'd love for you all to jump in as well, because I know in our prep call, I asked the question, is there a magic percentage that you should be allocating in your budget? And Eric just said that they themselves have allocated 6%, but is 6% the right number? Is there a range? Should it be 10%? Should it be more if you're going to be expecting or anticipating enforcement or lawsuits in the future that you're going to have to enforce? So, Louis, I'm going to turn it over to you to answer that first.
Yeah. I don't know that there's a magic percentage, because there's so many businesses that vary in what their revenue is as it relates to what you're spending on intellectual property. What I can tell you is that you want to have a good balance of applications filed, both for patents as well as trademarks. In some cases, it may be copyrights, or you may even look at trade secrets as a form of intellectual property. But you need to surround yourself people before a good patent attorney who can help you develop a IP strategy. So you've got the core assets of your business protected, but then also the ability to keep some open applications as you continue to develop your intellectual property to make sure that it's covering whatever you are working on currently. And so A lot of times inventors will look at this process and say, okay, I filed a patent, so now I've got protection. And typically, you want to have a portfolio of intellectual property that gives you the broadest protection. So it covers not only what you're working on now, but also what you may be working on in the future.
And Tiffany, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add and sort of, advocate for the founder. So someone in startup mode, those first few years. As Eric mentioned, and Lewis, although Eric has a percentage set aside for legal, it can be very, very difficult to have just a number like that, especially in startup mode. And it differs so much from industry to industry, having had startups that have spanned industry from space to broadband, et cetera. So I think it would be hard to have a percentage, but I will say that it's something that needs to be very intentional and explored, and its own separate breakout budget and strategy, as I was talking about in the last question. And really these days, there's no excuses. There's a lot of pro bono resources. I think you have that coming up in InventionCon. You guys even have this online webinar that you were doing that step by step would show people how to file. And there are a lot of patent attorneys and patent examiners that you can speak to. There's law schools that also have professors that focus on this and teach classes that if you're in startup mode, that can be a great collaboration for you and the school and the law school students to have these discussions and to develop budgets and strategy around it, because you'll need to do something, and you should have sort of, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum versions of how you would execute that. And then the only thing I would talk to that I didn't realize in the beginning, and I learned some really hard lessons on it, is not only are you looking at your portfolio and your protection, but you're also setting aside budget for defense. Every piece of intellectual property that ended up being valuable, which of course sounds like common sense, I have had to defend. As in, just because you have a patent or a trademark, or you got the official certificate from the Copyright Office, which I know is different, doesn't mean that someone's not going to try to take and use your IP. And if you don't have the money to defend it, the protection isn't as solid as you think.
All right, thanks, Tiffany. And so I'm going to back up a little bit because I feel like we didn't get an opportunity to talk a little bit more about your entrepreneurship journeys for all of you. I know that, Eric, you did talk a little bit about Scout. Can you tell us a little bit about your whole entrepreneurship journey, how you got to where you are, and a little bit more about Scout?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I've had an entrepreneurial spirit my entire life. Everything from selling people pictures at my parents' wedding reception with a single-use camera, a disposable camera, all the way up to like getting a lawnmower when I was like 13 to hustle my neighbors for lawn care. That's certainly something I've done. And still there. Sorry, I had some technical issues. Apologies. And so from there, I became a huge space nerd, loved space, wanted to get into the industry, got a background in physics and electrical engineering, and then went into the industry, initially working as an engineer for an asteroid mining company, where I found out I was a terrible engineer. So I stopped doing that stuff. Then went into the nonprofit sector, both in and out of the space industry, learning a bunch of interesting things. and then landed at the FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, doing the licensing and regulating of the launch and reentry industry, which for someone in a very regulated industry is an invaluable experience to have, just as a tip for anyone in a highly regulated industry. And then founded Scout in early 2019 to kind of provide what I could to the space industry to make it a more sustainable and operationally safe ecosystem. And so that's how I got there. And now I do that and wear a whole lot of other hats, but it's certainly been an exciting journey.
All right, Louis, and I'm going to turn it over to you, asking the same question on your entrepreneurial journey, but can you also go into a time or pinpoint a moment or decision that changed the course of your entrepreneurship journey?
Wow, that's an interesting question. My journey started in college. So I started my first business in college, my sophomore year. I always saw opportunities, and I had a professor in economics teach me about supply and demand. When there's a demand for a product or a service, and when the marketplace isn't satisfying that demand, there should be a business opportunity. So rather than just sit in class and take notes, I thought, why not put those lessons to action? And so I started my first business out of my fraternity room, started selling lacrosse equipment. It eventually evolved into selling screen printed apparel. And by the time I left college, we had the 24th largest screen printing company in the United States with over 300 employees and 80,000 square feet of manufacturing. I moved to Charlotte to start a NASCAR apparel company because I saw an opportunity there. The intellectual property we leveraged then was trademarks and copyrights, grew that business and sold it. And then I really started to get into inventing, and I started to invent products that I would then protect and license to other companies. And I realized that there wasn't any real, accountability in bringing a product to market. You typically work with outside companies to design or engineer or prototype your product. It may be a company that helps with the manufacturing or the branding or even launching a crowdfunding campaign. And the market wasn't really providing that resource all in a single point of use. And so in 2001, I started Inventus to be that accountable resource where not only could we provide those resources, but we'd be willing to put skin in the game and tie our compensation to success. And so over our 20-year history, we've launched thousands of consumer products and medical devices. We've raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in crowdfunding campaigns for our clients. And we've helped businesses get off the ground that may not have achieved that success without that a little bit of extra push. But, the real change in my focus, I think really came out of respect for intellectual property. When you realize how valuable a patent is and that ability to prevent others from making, using, or selling what you've created, it gives you that added incentive, that encouragement to go out there and take risk as an entrepreneur and start a company. The fact that the government provides you with that property right is a huge incentive to go out and assume that risk, to raise capital, to create jobs, and bring those new products and services to the marketplace.
Thanks, Louis. And so now over to you, Tiffany. Same question on your entrepreneurship journey. And also if you had any decisions that changed the course of your entrepreneurship journey as well.
Yeah, so for me, you'll see there's a common theme. I too started my first enterprises as a kid. I started my first enterprises in elementary school, and I used the term enterprise loosely. It was lemonade stands. It was cleaning and drying out the seeds from various food. I'm an urban farmer and selling seeds. It was in high school. I was also a musician when I was younger and spent the majority of my money on music and concert tickets. And so I started a business around selling concert tickets. It was legal in DC from your home, not from the venue. But in any case, with all that practice, by the time I got to university, like Lewis, I noticed something, me and my friends, that every kid tended to sling their backpack over one shoulder. And my friends and I invented the first one-strap backpack. That's what we filed for a patent on. And being that was the late 80s and I was the CEO, I had to deal with all the manufacturing and inventory and distribution and sales and customer care, all the basic elements of a business. I was taught in that backpack business in ways that to this day, I don't get in software, right? Like to have a physical product business. So we got our first patent in 50 retail outlets and then had the first experience of having to defend a patent. I did not defend it very well. I tried. We had the opportunity to sell the company, but we needed all four of the founders to agree and one didn't. So then after that, the other company just used our intellectual property. So that was a lesson learned for me that I took through both, don't have unanimous consent unless you absolutely need it in an operating agreement, and the importance of having resources to defend your intellectual property. And then from there, startup team for World Space, and that was a satellite radio company, raised 670 plus a follow-on of 200 something million to build and launch 3 satellites to cover every country on Earth. Some of that money went to MP3 and MP4 technology development. Some of that money went into developing new chipsets and receivers for radio, for satellite radio. Some of that money went to funding XM Radio, which was our North American play. And then went on to do a number of other startups, from next generation broadband. We're some of the technology behind the self-install kits and automating the activation of broadband internet, and eventually digital phone, which was a lot harder. Also co-founded a healthcare clinic in Ethiopia that's treated over 12,000 patients. And then currently, I'll sort of skip ahead to Tibetan and SimWin Sports. So SimWin Sports is the first esports league in the metaverse. And so we're really excited about that. It'll launch before the end of the year. And then Tibetan is an ed tech company where I teach everyone else the skills of being an entrepreneur, creator, and innovator, so that we can have more imagination coming into the world. I would say a pivotal moment for me was when I recognized how important narrative and storytelling was in the process, and start to hone my skills on storytelling and being a persuasive storyteller. Many of us geek and inventor entrepreneurs, might be more introverted than the rest of the population because we spend so much time in our studio or lair or lab, doing our inventions. So I really took an active, conscious, intentional practice around storytelling and persuasive narrative. And to this day, I'll teach at Cornell, I'll teach at Yale University, University of South Carolina, and other schools and platforms the skill set of persuasive storytelling. And when I start to really hone that skill set, it was after the backpack startup, but before I raised the money for the satellite radio. So I encourage that to any of my fellow innovators and inventors going out there. And one of the ways that you can do it in a class, either take a Tibetan workshop, but another way is to take improv. Like I took a lot of improv acting and improv comedy to sort of get over the hump for that skill.
Maybe I will take that improv comedy class. And so that sounds like a great idea, Tiffany. And so both Lewis, you and Tiffany have both mentioned learning as part of your journey, the importance of intellectual property. And I'm going to turn the question over to Eric on how did you learn about IP, and do you have any recommendations on how others who might be listening in can learn about intellectual property?
So prior to founding my company, I had loose experience and knowledge of IP processes and patents, trademarks, everything like that. But I didn't have any tangible experience until I started the company. And at Scout, we've gone through several different accelerator programs, notably which was Techstars last year. And, something they hammered in a lot was the importance of protecting your assets and, having market defensibility and all of that stuff. And that combined with some other experiences we had provide us with the foundation we needed and the motivation we needed to go forward and pursue our first IP via patent, but we're also doing some copyright and trademarking work with logos and branding and things like that. So a bit of a wider net than just the patents themselves. But that's generally how I've done a lot of things. It's just you learn by doing, and you gain that experience through going through the process. I'm sure I'll have to take one of Tiffany's classes, honestly, because, a lot of, just general educational classroom-based things sometimes don't provide that tangible experience you need to really take in that knowledge and move forward. And as a company at Scout, through the experiences we had through Techstars, through filing a patent, through getting our first payload to space last summer, each of those is a unique experience. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. That's a big milestone, especially for a startup in the space industry. Getting something into space is not an easy process. But each of those is an amazing learning experience that you won't really be able to master until you've done something like that. So it's, one of those things, I'm sure there are great experiences through classes and things. But the ultimate experience is just doing things. And then if you do them wrong, learning what you did wrong, correcting, moving forward and improving. And, it's all about trial and error throughout everything. And that's entrepreneurship. And, hopefully you learn things the easy way and not the hard way.
Thanks, Eric. Lewis, can you tell us a little bit about how you built your support network professionally and personally, and how that benefited you in building your companies, especially when it comes to Inventus, which is all about that support network, it sounds like?
Yeah. Well, it's really important to surround yourself with people who complement the skills you have. What you don't want to do is have a bunch of visionaries on your team. You need to have people who actually execute and get things done. And so you want to make sure that you've got the right people in not only your organization, but also in your network that bring the experience, the relationships, the resources to the table to make this journey a whole lot more enjoyable and more likely successful. Those people could be in sales or in finance, it could be legal, it could be manufacturing, it could be operations, but typically the entrepreneur, the inventor, is the visionary. They've got the dream, they've got this vision for what they've created and what it can be. But if you just sit around and dream all day and you don't follow through, all you have is a great idea. So you need to have the people who will bring those other skills to the table, the people who can get it done, the people who can help build a company around what you've created. And then, of course, all of the legal assistants, the patent attorneys, the corporate attorneys that will protect the business, protect your idea, and make it much more likely that you'll achieve a successful exit at some point in the future.
All right, thanks, Lewis. I'm actually going to jump back to you, Eric, to ask that same question on how to build your network as you are starting. When you started Scout, how did you build that professionally and personally?
Yeah, I started from college. I got involved in industry organizations. If you're in the space industry in college, Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, or SEDS, is the organization to be a part of. And that really got me tied into the network from there. I also got involved in other industry advocacy organizations. And for whatever industry you're in, those exist. Just seek them out. And from there, over time, leverage those connections. I never called in a favor. I didn't call in a favor for a decade until I started my company, and I just built up my network. And you'll be amazed the kind of utility you can get out of the network you build and the friendships you develop, and a group of people you can lean on for experience or resources or whatever. And what Lewis was saying, be self-aware about who you are as the entrepreneur. Know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, and be really honest with yourself. And especially as a startup, hire for your weaknesses and not your strengths. I am a super disorganized person, not the best person to be running an organized business, right? So amongst the first hires I made were people who were organized and structured and could develop those kinds of processes and organizational systems. And being self-aware from the get-go really helps you get over a lot of those burdens. So network as much as you can. And second is know your weaknesses and supplement your weaknesses where you can. And that will help you out an immense amount on your road through entrepreneurship and founding your first company in your 20th. And, look forward to seeing you on this panel a few years from now.
All right, thanks, Eric. And so, Tiffany, believe it or not, we are towards the end of our presentation. So I am actually going to ask you the very last question that we have. And so we at the USPTO, in part through the regional offices, I'm part of the Texas regional office, we do strive for promoting IP awareness to all audiences and backgrounds. And you're definitely a promoter of IP awareness and are passionate about hitting all communities. How do you believe other companies can manage to promote IP, and what recommendations do you have for that?
Yes. Oh, wow. Thank you. I get the money question, right? The question. First, before I go to answer it, I want to say congratulations to Eric. It's unusual to have two space entrepreneurs on something because few people decide to do, that one of some of their first startups or the first startup in space. So that was why I was giving you the hands motion, because I remember in October of 1998 when we were launching our first satellite, and it is really daunting, so many things can go wrong. So congratulations. Also, I want to say there's a QR code, if you noticed, on my frame. And so anyone that wants to contact me, that's the best way to contact me. And I put my LinkedIn in the chat. Someone has already reached out to me, so that's why I put that there. And in answer to that question, starting early, interesting, while we were doing this session, a kid inventor reached out to me and was like, what do you do to get kids activated in this and to get in the invention space? So I'm going to answer it to him and to everyone else that's watching this. At the end of the day, innovation and invention goes to imagination. And when you look at companies, as you were asking, Hope, and when you look at schools and really activating our society on innovation and invention, it goes back to imagination. So I typically talk about innovation and invention from the perspective of valuing your imagination, valuing your ideas. And when I speak to organizations and speak to audiences, I use very general and accessible entry points versus coding or technology, which isn't as accessible to everyone, right? I start with imagination and then I talk about the story, the collaboration, et cetera, that actually is incredible. You know, we are natural inventors. If you look at any child, there's, I have this idea, I'm doing this, what about this? Drawing, sketching, trying to show you some sort of new way. So it's important when you're looking at innovation and invention as individuals and organizations that you talk about it, that you take away the product or technology or the invention and first talk to the human being. So I would like to close up with actually one of the poems that I use when I'm trying to activate people around innovation and invention. And it's a tribute to Hermione Granger of Harry Potter, because I think she is our archetype, right? Like where we have all this magic inside of us, but people are calling us muggles. And that magic that's inside of us could be the next cure for cancer, the next, way to optimize, space, what we're doing in space, etc. So this poem is called Hermione Rising, and it's a tribute to imagination and innovation. May I share that with you now? Oh, okay. So can I take the main stage for a second? I imagine a better way, something disruptive and innovative, used and revered, demanded and paid for, something transformative. Imagination, why do we deny it and discount it? It's the source of all innovation. Einstein was theoretical, not applied. Da Vinci, an artist and a scientist. George Washington Carver, no vision, no hope. And Harriet, well, Harriet had to imagine freedom before she took the first step. I have a dream of traveling to space, of curing cancer, of running for office, of peace, unity, equality, and equity. You get what I'm saying? It's not about the how, it's about the why, the sense of purpose. No need to teach imagination, just endorse it. And with grace, give space for it. It's not to be packed away. It should be on display in schools and offices and invention cons, right? A priority among the others. Serious vote for tinkering and sketching and making and for play. Forcing memorization of someone else's prior imagination is not the way. The recipe gives space to extend and expand a concept through empathy and understanding, through diversity and collaboration, an embrace for imagination in the case of them all. The more minds that imagine together, the more innovation blossoms. The more diverse these minds, the taller it grows. And if it's fueled by love and understanding, it thrives and soars. We are 7 billion strong, brothers and sisters. We can do anything unless we fight each other. Go human or go home. My fellow dreamers, you are our future game changers. Your place is at the top of the class. Take out your wand. Let's see if I can do this. Yep. And cast the spell of I want that. It's okay if it's messy. Creating new realities will always be messy. Practice, rehearse, experiment, try, screw up, and then rise up. Wield the magic of hope and faith, and know that the world may attack your genius now, but love you for it later. Hermione is rising, and her power is limitless, and so is yours. I pray you too, like her, will use it for the greater good.